Welcome into I'll Have You Know. This is your co-host, David Druglever, Rice Business Class of 2012. This is a special episode. Before we get rocking here, we have a couple folks I'd like to introduce. It does take a team to make all this stuff happen. So I'd like to introduce Tim Okabayashi, Class of 2005. And we also have Kyle Rowland on as well. Tim, do you want to say hello?
Hey, David, really excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Tim, also you're a member of a alumni association as well. So as we've been working together for almost a year now, what is it that you're excited about with this podcast and what we're creating here?
Dave, we're really excited to bring these audible stories from alumni to help engage with the broader Rice MBA community.
Awesome. And Kyle, we want to hear from you as well. Kyle is the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations. Kyle, you want to share a little bit about what you're excited about with I'll Have You Know?
Sure. So my role is generally regional programming outside of Houston, and I'm always looking for ways to engage folks beyond just having events. So I've really enjoyed listening to the really great episodes that y'all have been recording, as well as interacting with folks on the back and on the front end, just helping to engage a greater population.
Yeah, and I think engagement is really key here. And so as we're moving forward towards the alumni reunion getting together, and we want to see people engage a lot more. And so we're running a special drawing. And Kyle, you want to share a little bit more about how we're structuring the drawing and how people can cash in on the swag?
Heck yeah, we are running a drawing. So, for those of you who are listening to us, we'd love if you would leave a comment or review on Apple Podcasts anytime between March 1st and March 15th. Between anyone who's left a comment, we're going to go ahead and select two winners to win a swag package that our office will send to you as a thanks for listening. There's some more details in the show notes. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but definitely check them out and go ahead and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate that. And as most folks know, we're creating a platform here. We're covering lots of business and management topics, trying to make this more and more relevant to everyone. So leaving the comments there and subscribing is tremendously helpful to us to make this more relevant to the broader Rice business ecosystem and beyond. So Tim, Kyle, thank you so much for chiming in here. Again, thank you in advance for leaving some comments and subscribing on Apple Podcasts. And without further ado, on to the show.
Today on I'll Have You Know.
As public entities look at their balance sheets post-COVID with the tax impact and the revenue impact, they are probably going to be more and more open to the concept of private capital coming in and helping them fund either new projects or help them monetize existing assets.
Mark Morehouse has earned his Rice Owl Wings twice, first as an undergrad in chemical engineering, and second graduating with an MBA. He's spent a career in investment banking specializing in transportation infrastructure, one of the biggest areas where he sees the potential for explosive growth, public-private partnerships, a concept much more widely accepted in other parts of the world. Today he talks about private investment in public infrastructure, the biggest transportation infrastructure project in the U.S. he's involved in, and what's the most unusual venture he's raised money for. Joining us today on I'll Have You Know, Mark Morehouse, a double Rice grad. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
Hey, Christine, great to see you. Glad to be here to talk about Rice and adventures during and after.
So I'd like to talk about your, I guess, what you would call a double graduate. You completed undergrad, went on to Rice Business. Is that fairly unusual? Do you get a lot of attention because of that?
You know, I don't get a lot of attention because of it. And I would say it's fairly unusual, although there were two people in my class at Jones School who were of that description. One of them was my wife. So we were double income, no kids people before we went to Rice, and both decided to go back at the same time. And then we had a kid in the middle of it. So it's one of those cautionary tales they probably don't tell people who are applying to Rice, but we were that couple. And quite the adventure.
You were an Air Force kid, so you moved around a lot growing up. Was Texas a place where you spent a lot of your childhood?
So not really. I mean, we moved probably every 2 or 3 years. Can't remember what my total count was, but 12 or 13 different places. But I went to high school for most of my high school years in San Antonio, and it does feel like home. My folks retired there after they left the Air Force, and we've got strong roots there. And so I would like to consider myself a Texan, and we may be heading back there before too long when we're done with the working careers.
You specialized in chemical engineering in undergrad and then went on to a career in investment banking. Can you talk a little bit about that transition? What was that like? And was that your plan all along?
So it wasn't the plan all along. It's a plan that developed slowly over time. I got the chemical engineering degree really knowing that I wanted to be an engineer and knowing that I wanted to go to Rice as a great Texas engineering school really set me on the course to get that chemi degree. And coming out of college, I thought, well, yeah, the chemical industry is the place to be. So I went and I did some really fun and interesting things in engineering. I built an ethylene plant, did some contract manufacturing, lots of interesting stuff, and was able to transition that engineering background into a sales and marketing job with the same chemical company. So, took sort of the technical skills and then crafted them into more of a sales role, which was interesting and fun. I actually got to launch a couple of new products in the chemical industry as part of that role. But what I found was I really enjoyed the sales part of it, but it wasn't very technically challenging. I enjoyed the engineering part of it, but at least with the company that I was working for, the plants that they had were not located in the nicest of places, and I'm more of an urban person, and so wanted to combine both the technical challenges that come with engineering and sort of the salesmanship that I found that I was fairly good at, and investment banking seemed like a great way to combine those two skill sets. And so, after many years in the chemical industry, I decided to go back to business school with the specific goal of going into investment banking. And the Jones School was a great opportunity to really facilitate that transition, that career change.
What are some of the highlights that you recall looking back on your experience at Rice Business and also some of the important things that it sort of taught you in your current role?
I think the finance program at Rice was fantastic, and the professors that I had there were challenging and innovative and very helpful and hands-on. And I think that's really a hallmark of the Rice experiences or the Jones School experience is hands-on instruction and a personal relationship with some of the smartest professors that you could find. And so I think back to really the finance courses as really being my core focus. Obviously, there were other courses that were helpful, but really the finance side of it really helped me build a strong basis with which to pitch myself to the investment banking world and then be prepared to execute in the banking world really right from the start.
You're in Chicago now. Is this the time of year that you miss Texas the most? Are we getting into that time of year?
It's the very early stages of that cycle, right? January and February here are a little bit grim. Right now, we had a little bit of snow, but not anything measurable, and I'm still able to go work out outside. So that's good. Come January, February, as the days are gray and the snow piles up, it's a little bit grim and makes me long for Texas.
Yes, I'm a Midwesterner originally, so I can relate.
Yep. Yeah, of course, the other side of the coin is in, July and August when it's, 90 degrees and 95% humidity in Houston. It's pretty nice here generally, although it does get pretty warm sometimes.
You are currently managing director of Oppenheimer Transportation Infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about just some of the big projects that you've worked on? Some of them have national and international reach.
Yeah, so I've been at Oppenheimer now for 3 years. I run the public-private partnership investment banking group, which is a small group, but that's my responsibility. And our focus is really on public-private partnerships for transportation infrastructure. And for those of you who aren't familiar with public-private partnership, it's basically private investment in public infrastructure. So that could be investments in toll roads or airports or ports or buildings. It's an investment mechanism that has seen a lot of activity in Europe and Asia and Canada, but not so much in the United States. And now it's really starting to catch on here in the States. And we at Oppenheimer are part of that innovation wave. So we're working on a couple of really interesting projects that are big and innovative. One of them is Terminal 1 at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York, which is an international terminal, international only. And the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has gone out to basically redevelop that terminal and has selected my clients, which is the Terminal 1 Group Association, or TOGA, which is a consortium of 4 international airlines, along with their private equity sponsors, to redevelop the terminal. And it is the biggest transportation infrastructure project in the U.S. currently, somewhere between $7 and $9 billion of development. So very exciting. The other project we're working on is a toll bridge in Joliet, Illinois, which it's a greenfield project. So it's brand new construction of a brand new bridge, which will provide access to one of the largest inland ports in the country. We're advising the winning bidders on that project, and that's a project that's about to reach financial close. So very exciting that we're going to be breaking ground on a new bridge here in Illinois.
So do you see the potential for a lot of growth in the U.S. in that P3 banking sector?
Yeah, look, it's catching on because it's sort of an innovative and different way of doing things, and because the U.S. municipal and public sector market has access to tax-exempt financing, which really doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's a little bit harder of a sell, but I think particularly as public entities look at their balance sheets post-COVID with the tax impact and the revenue impact, they are probably going to be more and more open to the concept of private capital coming in and helping them fund either new projects or help them monetize existing assets in the space. And I guess the second point is I really think that success breeds success. So the more these projects that actually get done, the more acceptable it will be and more easy for the public sector to say, yeah, this is something that we would be interested in doing. I think the best example of that is probably in the airports space. If you look around the world, airports all over the world, in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia, are largely privately owned. In the U.S., that's really not the case. There are 2 privately owned airports in the U.S. One was constructed specifically without any federal funding, and the other one is the San Juan Airport in Puerto Rico, which is the first and only airport to undergo the FAA's Airport Investor Partnership Program, which basically allows for private investment to come in and take over an airport under a long-term concession. And that's a deal that I worked on behalf of the Puerto Rico P3 Authority back in 2012 and 2013, and we successfully brought that deal across the finish line. So that's one airport now that's been done. There are lots of airports around the country that could benefit from the multiple benefits that come from the AIPP, and certainly the federal government has been very supportive of the concept of privatizing airports. And really, I think it's a question of, can you get the public sector to see the benefits, and there are many, and to overcome this hasn't been done here before. So if you think about it, there's a lot of need for political courage from the leadership, and that's a key component to any public-private partnership. Prior to the San Juan Airport getting done, the city of Chicago tried to privatize Midway Airport, and I advised the city of Chicago on that process. And we received significant bids and a winning bid of about $2.5 billion for a 99-year concession of Midway. Unfortunately, we opened those bids on the Friday after Lehman Brothers collapsed in the global financial crisis. And the world basically ended then from a financing standpoint. The lenders dried up, the equity eventually walked away, and that deal fell apart. I think if that deal had gotten done, if we had gotten that across the finish line of financially closing, that there would be 20 airports privatized in the U.S. already. But because because Midway didn't get there. That's not a great precedent. Because San Juan is in Puerto Rico and people don't recognize that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. It's under the FAA, it's under the FAA's pilot program or under the FAA's AIPP. And this deal was done under the auspices of the US federal government. It's hard to get people to see that. So it's a tough sell, but one that I continue to evangelize around the US and in the hopes of finding that next thing. And I think the next thing is out there. And once one gets done, there will be many others to follow.
One of the things I was reading about with your work with Oppenheimer and some of your past projects was social infrastructure. What is social infrastructure?
So social infrastructure is an interesting subset of the public-private partnership market. And basically, it's the monetization of non-revenue generating public structures. So think about vertical infrastructure, whether it's a police station or a courthouse or a campus building at a university. Those structures really don't generate any revenue, so it's difficult to find a revenue stream. So basically, social infrastructure ends up being a contract with the public entity agreeing to make a payment, so essentially a lease payment. In the parlance of P3 world, it's called availability payment. So when the building is made available to the public entity, they have to pay the availability payment. And the private sector will come in, they will design, build, finance, operate, and maintain that building under a set of defined criteria. So bathrooms have to be clean, the AC has to work, et cetera, and they run it, and the public sector uses it and just has to make that payment when it's available for them to use it. It's a really interesting way of not only financing a new construction project, but also transferring risk of design and construction risk, of operational risk, and then relying on the expertise of people that build and run buildings to have something that is going to be in great shape for the life of whatever the term is of the deal. So these deals are usually 30, 40, 50 year transactions. And if you as the public entity can have somebody else come in and ensure that everything is up and running and up to standards over that lifetime, I think there's a huge benefit operationally that maybe you wouldn't get as a public entity that is just financing a building using municipal bonds, and then you've got to maintain it, you've got to operate it. You may not put in the best air conditioning system, for instance, but the public sector would, because they're going to be on the hook for repairing it over time, and they understand what the right standard is in terms of construction and life cycle cost, and they're going to be responsible for it. So you as the public entity, you care what they put in, but you don't really have to worry about it, because if it's broken, you don't have to pay for it. It's an interesting concept, and one that is catching on. There have been a number of projects around the country in courthouses, civic centers. We've worked on a couple police stations that didn't actually get done, but conceptually seem to fit the mold. And I think there will probably be more and more of that.
So I guess I'm sort of looking at it as this is an asset to the public, even though it may not be aspects of the facility may not be revenue generating, but it's still this tremendous asset to the general public. Is that sort of the way it's viewed?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a facility that can be used by the public, by whatever entity has signed the contract, and it's going to be there and operated under specific standards. So it's going to be usable, and if it's not usable, you don't have to pay for it. I guess that the nuance there is that just to throw out another sort of civic example, parking. If you as a city own a parking structure, that parking structure generates revenue as people pay to park. You could do a public-private partnership of that asset, and that would be, you wouldn't have to pay anything. The rates that are paid by the parkers would be the revenue stream that would support that financing. In the case that you don't have parking revenue, you as the public entity have to come up with the money in order to fund the deal.
Let's talk a little bit about COVID. We know COVID has caused tremendous disruption in the transportation industry in general, particularly air travel. On your end, you're sort of on the front end of a lot of these projects. How has COVID impacted your business?
At its base, things like airports where traffic is down. At one point it was down like 90% in the U.S. I think the numbers now are closer to down 60% or so. It's hard to make the case for that being a great revenue stream. But at the same time, I think people, particularly in the infrastructure investing world, take a long view of things and realize that more than likely we're not going to be stuck in this situation forever. And so there will be a return to normalcy, and I think people will have different views on what that normalcy actually looks like in terms of passenger traffic, in terms of people's willingness to get on a plane, et cetera, is still up in question. Now, specifically, if you have clients who are airlines like I do, they're focused on really literally on survival right now, and it's a difficult time in the industry. So, it's hard for them to focus on infrastructure projects for the long term when they're trying to really save the business at its heart. So that's a bit disruptive. I guess the other piece that's sort of disruptive is, even though it's a technical industry and it's a finance industry, it's also a people-driven business. And not being able to get on a plane and not being able to go see clients either on the public side of things to convince them that these are good deals to do, or on the private sector side, just to maintain the relationships and introduce people to concepts. It's really hard. It's hard to keep the momentum going. But again, I remain optimistic that this is a temporary situation, and that eventually we'll get back to being able to get on planes and go pitch people on ideas and maintain relationships, and eventually all the underlying factors of traffic and people traveling will return, and we'll be able to really fully take advantage of this industry and the opportunities that are out there.
If the airlines survive this difficult period, we know it's not going to be a light switch returning to normal. But I think there is the feeling, at least in just casual conversations I've heard, that people are going to have such a desire to travel that if the airlines can survive, there's going to be just a heyday period of several years that people are going to want to take that trip they've been putting off or they've had to put off.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of pent-up demand on the leisure side, right? People are trapped in their homes and want to get out and go places. People in Chicago are right now thinking about the winter that's coming up and wanting to go someplace warm. So yeah, that's definitely out there. And I've got to say, on the business side of things, I've taken one business trip since February, which is unusual for me. I'm generally on the road, 3 or 4 days a week. Taking one trip, and it felt really good to get back to that face-to-face conversation. We were obviously very careful about how we undertook our interactions, right? But it was productive. It was worth it. It felt, right to be out there in front of clients. And I think there've got to be a lot of business people out there that have that same feeling, that you can't get the personal interaction that is really necessary to do sales at a high level of anything, whether it's financial services or goods, without that personal interaction. And the online alternative, while it is okay, is not a real substitute for face-to-face interaction.
I know you've worked a lot with the airlines and M&A, and we've seen a lot of that with at least American Airlines in the past few years. But because of COVID, do you see that continuing as a method of survival for some of the airlines?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a lot of room for additional consolidation in the airline industry, right? There's three majors, or four if you include Southwest, and then there's a number of low cost carriers. Obviously, all of the three majors, United, American, and Delta, have reached their current footprint via M&A, right? So there's been combination of previous majors into now the three remaining majors, and Southwest has been Southwest, and continues to grow organically. I don't think there's room. I don't personally think there's much room for greater consolidation among those four. Maybe there's some room among the smaller carriers to combine further, but I don't know that that's really going to move the needle. If you look at it, below the surface, right below the surface of the obvious combination of majors, you see lots of things like joint ventures with international carriers and so on. I think that will continue, right? I think that's a smart way for the airlines to expand their footprint without necessarily fully combining with somebody. So I think you'll probably continue to see that, but I wouldn't look for a headline of majors combining in the airline industry.
We've seen a lot of that, yes. I have one last COVID-related question. When it comes to transportation, we know there have been just about every business talks about how life is going to be different after COVID in their industry. Is there one thing in particular that you think COVID has changed our way of thinking when it comes to transportation? It's going to be maybe completely different when we, quote, return to normal.
I'm not sure that there's one single thing. I mean, I could think of just personally of a couple different things, which, I used to take the train to work here in Chicago. I'm not sure that and a lot of people do, right? And it's part of Chicago's whole attitude. Everybody gets on the L and commutes downtown. I'm not sure that that's going to come back. That's going to be a hard sell, I think, and it's going to take some time. Contrast that with the airline industry, which is taking huge steps to ensuring that their product is safe, that the experience, is comfortable for their customers. They have air filtration, which makes it. There's so much air flowing through the airplanes that it's not a stagnant space, even though it seems like a small space. I don't think you have that on a train car, and so it's going to be harder, I think, for the transit industry to make the case for it being safe versus the airline industry, which I think is already in the process of doing that. And I personally feel safe on an airplane. It's as safe a small space, I think, as you're going to find.
Mark, you've worked on a lot of deals. Do you have any behind the scenes stories that you could share with us?
Yeah, without really getting into a great amount of detail, thought it'd be interesting to relate just one of the interesting projects that I worked on that's sort of ancillary to the airline industry that I was covering previously. We actually raised money, some outside investment into Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic space tourism business, which isn't really an airline business, but was close enough that I had the opportunity to help him to raise capital. It's an interesting business where they'll be taking 6 people at a time up into low Earth orbit and allowing them to unbuckle and be weightless and then return back down to Earth. It's a cool little project, and I think they're nearing the point of actually taking people up. But it was an interesting departure from the normal airline business that I was banking.
Obviously, that's an interesting project, but when you have a name like Richard Branson behind something, is it easier to get dollars or not so much?
So, I mean, obviously, Richard Branson has been very successful in a number of different ventures. I think space tourism is is a pretty tough sell for anybody. And this is probably 10 years ago that we were doing this. So, very early days, that made it a little bit challenging, but yeah, the Branson name obviously was helpful.
So we know your life isn't all work, and you've talked a little bit about you used to surf, cycle. Talk a little bit about those experiences and how do those just give you balance in your life?
Yeah, look, I think it's great to get outdoors and enjoy the outdoors. And yeah, I used to be a surfer back in the day. Texas Gulf Coast, East Coast, a little bit on the West Coast. I've even surfed on Lake Michigan, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as a vacation strategy. It's always fun to be out in nature, and I've sort of replaced that now with cycling. As a way, something I can do on essentially a daily basis here in Chicago and around the country. And so, yeah, it's a way to get out there and breathe fresh air. Currently cold air in Chicago, but fresh air, and sort of disconnect and commune with nature a little bit. So all those themes sort of flow through, whether you're surfing or cycling or whatever. You're out there, you're essentially alone, you're with nature. It's all healthy and good and good for you.
And I think we're seeing even more of that, people just getting out, returning to some of those things because our activity load isn't maybe as heavy right now.
Yeah. Look, I've got to say, I've seen more people out on the bike paths and bike lanes of greater Chicagoland this summer than I've ever seen before. Obviously, there's a big push, and obviously cycling is one of those things you can do where your exposure to people is limited. You're not close to people just by safety, and you're moving hopefully fast, and you've got lots of air moving around you. So it's not really I don't think, I'm not an epidemiologist, but not a COVID threat to be out there on a bicycle. And so I thought a lot of people are doing it, less and less now that things are cooling off. But over the summer, certainly, that was a trend that was going wild here in Chicagoland, at least.
You've had time to look back on your Rice career, both undergrad and business school. And when you look back on it, what are some of the things that come to mind as far as what shaped you and gotten you to where you are today?
So really, I think one of the greatest things that Rice has going for it is it attracts some of the smartest people around. And I think about my experience, particularly in undergrad, and the people that were around me were so smart, just unbelievably smart. And I think about, coming from a pretty good high school in Texas where I was, fairly well ranked in the class. It was pretty humbling to show up at Rice undergrad and be around these people who were just brilliant, and to learn from them, to learn from your peers is almost as valuable as learning from the professors, right? You're growing and you're learning and you're thinking differently just based on the influence of people that you have around you. And I think at a place like Rice where the students are super smart, it's easy to be humbled by much smarter people being around you, and that's really part of the experience. At the Jones School too, right? Obviously there were a diverse group of people with lots of different business backgrounds who provided a different perspective, and because you basically know everybody in the class, you're able to learn from lots of different people, and lots of different perspectives, and that really enhances, again, the classroom education that's going on around you. It really makes for the full package.
There's been a lot of talk in recent years of the value of an MBA and whether it's maybe still as valuable. And now we're seeing right now, I think it's 60% increase in applicants because there's so many people out of work. What do you say to those who maybe question, is an MBA still valuable in your career trajectory?
Yeah, I think it's really important what you do with it, and it's really in your hands as the person going to get that degree. For me, it was a game changer, right? It opened up the doors to make the career transition that I I was trying to make. And without that degree, I never would have been able to make that transition. And so for me, it was game changing. And I think others that I know that have MBAs had the same experience, right? It's hard to move from engineering to banking or consulting or non-engineering, non-industry jobs without some sort of catalyst to make that change. And so, yeah, if you are considering changing industries, the MBA is extremely valuable. I've got to think, though, even beyond that, if you think about people that are like in executive MBA programs who, are sponsored by their company and not looking to make a change, really, then it's just increasing your skill set, and that obviously happens, right? It's not just the degree that allows you that allowed me to make the leap. It's the skills that I learned in the program. So even for somebody who doesn't intend on making a wholesale career change, I think there's got to be value to it. And, particularly for the executives who are sponsored by their firms, it's really your time as opposed to necessarily money out of pocket. But I'd say it's definitely got value as long as you take advantage of the time and you're serious about it and you use the skills that you learn and you learn the skills that are being offered to you. It's for me just an unbelievable return on investment.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with I'll Have You Know listeners?
Yeah, so I think really the overarching message, and maybe it's included in what I was saying previously, is you're going to be offered a lot of opportunities to make a change, and you're going to be offered a lot of opportunities to learn new things, whether it's in school or on the job. And I think you should always take advantage of those opportunities. And if you think about your career over the long haul, there's going to be lots of either opportunities or situations where you either can or must reinvent yourself. And so never pass up the opportunity to learn a new skill, to try something a little bit different, and then implement those skills when you need to make a change. I think, I chose to change industries, and I used my MBA as a catalyst to do that. Subsequently, in my career, I sort of had to reinvent my focus in banking, and was able to do that because I had tried things that were sort of off the beaten path of the industry that I was assigned to cover. Did some things a little bit different, and specifically airport privatization, that then allowed me to change and be a public-private partnership banker, without having made that leap in terms of expanding my skill set. It might have been tougher to sort of reinvent myself and repackage myself in terms of industries that I'm covering. And I think about Stephen Covey's 7 habits, right? Sharpen your saw is habit number 7. And I really feel like that is as important a lesson as you can learn and apply throughout your career.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mark Morehouse from Chicago, Illinois. We appreciate you being on the program.
Thanks, Christine. This was fun.
Stay warm up there this winter.
All right, will do.
Thanks.
This has been I'll Have You Know. Thanks for listening. You can find links and more information about our guests, hosts, and announcements on our website, business.rice.edu. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts, and leave us a comment while you're at it and let us know what you think. I'll Have You Know is a production of Rice Business and is sponsored by the Rice Business Alumni Board. The hosts of I'll Have You Know are myself, David Druglever, and Christine Dobbyn.